February 19th, 1945. D-Day, Iwo Jima. A Japanese soldier named Private Yamada crouches inside a reinforced concrete pillbox on the island's southeastern beaches. Through his firing slit, he watches landing craft approach through morning haze. His Arisaka Type 99 rifle rests against damp concrete, its 5-round internal magazine loaded. He's been told Americans are soft, their equipment inferior, their will to fight weak. The first Marines hit the black volcanic sand, and everything Yamada believed shatters in the next 60 seconds. The sound is wrong. Not the measured crack-pause crack of bolt-action rifles he expected, but a continuous roar that doesn't stop. 8 rounds, semi-automatic, from every American rifleman scrambling up the beach. His squadmates fire their Arisakas, work their bolts, fire again. The Marines fire 8 times, reload in 2 seconds with a metallic ping, and keep shooting. Before Yamada can cycle his bolt twice, the Marine opposite him has emptied his entire clip and is already reloading. This is the M1 Garand making its introduction to Imperial Japanese forces on Iwo Jima, and over the next 73 days, this weapon will fire an estimated 5.5 million rounds on this 8-square-mile island. The Japanese defenders, brave and fanatically committed, will learn what German soldiers discovered in Europe 2 years earlier. Superior tactics, superior fortifications, and superior fighting spirit cannot overcome systematic firepower disadvantage at the individual infantry level. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The mathematics of the firefight are brutal and undeniable. Yamada fires 5 rounds from his Arisaka before requiring manual reload. Each shot demands he break his sight picture, lift the bolt handle, pull back to eject the spent casing, push forward to chamber the next. Round, rotate down to lock, then reacquire his target. Under ideal conditions, 15 aimed shots per minute. Reality on Iwo Jima is far messier. The Marine facing him carries an M1 Garand that eliminates every manual step except pulling the trigger. Gas-operated semi-automatic operation means the rifle cycles itself, fire, and the weapon automatically ejects the spent case, chambers the next round, cocks the hammer. The Marine's cheek never leaves the stock. His sight picture never breaks. He presses the trigger 8 times in rapid succession, maintains his target centered, and John Garand's gas system handles the mechanics. Practical rate of fire, 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute, even for average infantry. Multiply this across an entire Marine rifle squad attacking Yamada's position. 12 Americans, 10 with Garands. That's 80 rounds delivered without pause before a single reload. Yamada's squad of 15 men with Arisakas might manage 75 rounds in their first volley, but every man must duck behind cover to reload, fingers working bolt handles and stripper clips. That's when the Americans own the battlefield. The continuous semi-automatic fire never gives the Japanese position a chance to breathe, to shift positions, to respond effectively. Japanese tactical doctrine, refined through years of warfare in China and the Pacific, emphasized discipline, preparation, and spiritual superiority. The Imperial Japanese Army trained soldiers to believe that Yamato Damashi, the spirit of Japan, would overcome material disadvantages. One Japanese soldier, properly motivated, equaled 10 decadent Americans. This wasn't mere propaganda. It was foundational military philosophy, taught from basic training through officer academy. The Arisaka Type 99 rifle, adopted in 1939 and named for the year 2599 inches, the Japanese imperial calendar, represented solid military engineering. It fired the 7.7mm Type 99 cartridge, powerful and accurate. The rifle itself was well made, reliable, simple to maintain. In trained hands, the Arisaka had conquered Manchuria, invaded China, swept through Southeast Asia, and dominated the Pacific in 1942. Japanese soldiers trusted their weapons because those weapons had delivered victory after victory. But the Arisaka shared the fundamental limitation of every bolt-action rifle ever designed. It required manual cycling between each shot, interrupting the soldier's aim, breaking his sight picture, consuming precious seconds. When Japanese infantry faced Chinese troops armed with similar bolt actions, this limitation didn't matter. When they faced British, Australian, and early war American forces also carrying bolt actions, the playing field remained level. Combat outcomes depended on tactics, position, and fighting spirit. The M1 Garand changed that equation completely. The United States had adopted the Garand as standard infantry rifle in January 1936, becoming the first nation to equip its entire military with semi-automatic rifles. By the time Marines landed on Iwo Jima in February 1945, virtually every American infantryman carried a weapon that could fire 8 aimed shots as fast as the trigger could be pulled, then reload in under 3 seconds. Japanese military intelligence had compiled reports on the Garand throughout the war. Captured documents from Guadalcanal in 1942 mentioned American rifles with rapid-fire capability. After-action reports from Tarawa in November 1943 noted unexpectedly heavy rifle fire from Marine assault teams. Intelligence assessments from Saipan in June 1944 explicitly identified the M1 Garand as a significant tactical problem, but these reports filtered slowly through military bureaucracy, and Japanese industrial capacity couldn't respond even when the problem was acknowledged. Japan had experimented with semi-automatic rifle designs. The Type 4 rifle, essentially a copy of the American M1 Garand, entered extremely limited production in 1944. Fewer than 250 were manufactured before war's end. Japanese industry, strained by years of conflict, Allied bombing, and resource shortages, couldn't retool factories to produce complex semi-automatic rifles at scale. The overwhelming majority of Japanese infantry fought the entire war with bolt-action Arisakas. On Iwo Jima, this firepower disparity would prove catastrophic. The island, just 8 square miles of volcanic rock and ash, had been transformed into perhaps the most heavily fortified position in military history. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding the island's defense, understood Japan's strategic situation by late 1944. American industrial might was unstoppable. Japanese forces couldn't win through frontal combat. The only option was to make victory so costly that American resolve would crack. Kuribayashi abandoned traditional Japanese defensive doctrine. No banzai charges, no suicide attacks, no wasting lives in futile gestures. Instead, he ordered construction of an elaborate tunnel system connecting over 15 miles of underground fortifications, concrete pillboxes with interlocking fields of fire, artillery positions dug into Mount Suribachi's slopes, machine gun nests camouflaged into volcanic rock, every position designed to kill Marines while remaining protected from naval bombardment and air attack. The plan was brilliant. Make Americans pay for every yard with blood. Stretch the battle for months if possible. Demonstrate that invading the Japanese home islands would cost millions of American casualties. Kuribayashi knew his 21,000 defenders would die. He accepted that, but he intended to kill 15,000 Americans in the process, making American military and political leaders question whether unconditional surrender was worth the price. What Kuribayashi couldn't fully account for was the tactical reality his soldiers would face in individual firefights. His fortifications were excellent. His defensive positions were masterfully designed. His soldiers were brave, well-trained, and absolutely committed. But every one of them carried a bolt-action rifle that fired 5 rounds before requiring manual reload. They would face Marines carrying semi-automatic rifles that fired 8 rounds with continuous trigger pulls, then reloaded in seconds. The Marines who hit the beaches on February 19th knew nothing of Kuribayashi's strategy. They'd been told Iwo Jima would be easier than previous island campaigns. Naval bombardment and air strikes had pounded the island for 72 days. Surely nothing could survive that. The landing would be quick. Resistance would be light. They'd secure the island in 5 days, perhaps a week. The volcanic sand told a different story. Black, loose, and deep, it swallowed boots up to the ankles. Marines struggled to move inland from the beach. Every step was exhausting, and then the Japanese opened fire. Not from the beaches, where naval gunfire had destroyed obvious positions, but from invisible positions inland, camouflaged into volcanic rock and reinforced concrete. Machine gun fire swept the beaches. Mortar rounds landed with devastating accuracy. Artillery shells, pre-registered on landing zones, fell in precise patterns. Marines dove for cover that didn't exist on open volcanic sand, and from hundreds of concealed pillboxes, Japanese riflemen like Yamada began shooting. This was when the M1 Garand proved its worth. Marines couldn't advance against the volume of fire pouring from hidden positions. They couldn't retreat. The beach offered no cover. So they did what their training and their weapons allowed them to do. They returned fire with overwhelming volume. Every rifleman had 8 rapid shots. Every squad could deliver 80 aimed rounds before a single man needed to reload. The continuous semi-automatic fire suppressed Japanese positions just enough for assault teams to move forward, for engineers to advance with demolitions, for Marines to begin the slow, brutal work of reducing fortifications one position at a time. Private Yamada, in his pillbox, experienced what thousands of Japanese defenders would experience over the next 73 days. He would fire 5 rounds, work his bolt, fire again. The Marines attacking his position would fire 8 more, a continuous roar of semi-automatic fire that never stopped. He would duck to reload, and incoming fire would intensify. He would rise to shoot, and multiple Garands would target his firing slit simultaneously. The tactical mathematics were inescapable. To survive more than a few minutes of combat, Yamada needed to hit his targets consistently while exposing himself minimally. The Marines attacking him could afford to miss more often because they could fire 4 rounds in the same time window. They could suppress his position with rifle fire alone, without deploying machine guns or calling artillery, just through the accumulated firepower of 8 men with M1 Garands. Japanese defenders adapted where possible. Some learned to time their shots during brief pauses in American fire, though those pauses were rare. Some targeted Marines during reload, trying to exploit the 2 to 3 second window when a Garand's clip was ejected and replaced. But in the chaos of combat, identifying individual reload windows amid continuous squad fire proved nearly impossible. By the time one Marine reloaded, 3 others were still shooting. The fortifications helped. Concrete pillboxes provided protection that open-ground combat never could. Japanese defenders could fire from covered positions, while Marines advanced across exposed volcanic sand and rock. But even superior position couldn't fully compensate for sustained firepower disadvantage. When Marines reached a pillbox, they could suppress its firing slits with Garand fire while demolition teams worked. Japanese defenders inside couldn't maintain effective return fire because incoming rounds were too numerous. Lieutenant Colonel Takeichi Nishi, commanding Japanese tank units on Iwo Jima, witnessed the firepower disparity from his position in the island's central sector. Nishi, an Olympic equestrian gold medalist and member of Japanese aristocracy, was no ordinary officer. He'd travelled extensively, understood Western military capability, and harboured no illusions about American firepower. His after-action reports, captured after his death in March 1945, specifically mentioned the volume of rifle fire from Marine infantry. Nishi noted that American squad-level firefights sounded like platoon-level engagements due to the sustained semi-automatic fire. He recommended that Japanese positions maintain absolute fire discipline, shooting only when certain of hitting, because attempting to match American volume of fire simply wasted ammunition and exposed defenders to overwhelming return fire. His tactical assessment was sound. His soldiers' bolt-action rifles couldn't win firefights through volume. They had to win through precision and position. But precision and position have limits when facing sustained semi-automatic fire. A Japanese soldier might be an excellent marksman. He might occupy a well-fortified position with excellent fields of fire. He might be absolutely committed to fighting to the death. None of that changed the mechanical reality that he could fire perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute, while his Marine opponent could fire 40. The mathematics accumulated across thousands of individual engagements over 73 days of combat. Every time a Marine squad encountered a Japanese position, American firepower advantage tilted the engagement toward American victory. Not guaranteed victory, Japanese defenders fought with suicidal determination, but tilted victory, making American success more likely and less costly than if both sides had equivalent weapons. The M1 Garand didn't win fights alone. Marines needed combined arms, support, artillery, naval gunfire, airstrikes, flamethrowers, demolitions, and tanks. But at the most fundamental level, when individual Marine riflemen encountered individual Japanese riflemen, the American with his Garand had clear and measurable advantage. He could deliver more fire faster, suppress enemy positions more effectively, and reload more quickly. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By the fifth day of battle, February 23rd, when Marines raised the flag on Mount Suribachi's summit, they'd already fired an estimated 1 million rounds from M1 Garands alone. That figure doesn't include machine gun fire, carbine fire, or ammunition from other weapons. Just Garand fire, from rifle squads advancing across volcanic sand and rock, reducing fortifications, clearing tunnels, and fighting the most intense infantry combat of the Pacific War, the Japanese defenders noticed. Captured diaries and letters, recovered after the battle, repeatedly mention American firepower. One diary entry from an unknown soldier dated March 2nd, 1945, describes being pinned in a cave by continuous rifle fire. "They never stop shooting," the entry reads. "Every time we try to move, bullets hit rock around us. Our rifles cannot answer them. We fire 5 times and must reload. They fire forever." The psychological impact went beyond tactical frustration. Japanese military culture emphasized spiritual superiority and fighting spirit as decisive factors in combat. Soldiers were taught that physical courage and willingness to die would overcome material disadvantages. The Bushido Code, as interpreted by wartime military leadership, held that Japanese warriors possessed inherent advantages over soft, materialistic Americans who valued comfort over honor. The M1 Garand demolished that mythology at the most visceral level. Japanese defenders, brave beyond question, fighting from superior positions, absolutely committed to victory or death, found themselves systematically outshot by American infantrymen who might be equally brave but possessed superior weapons. Spiritual superiority couldn't cycle a bolt faster. Fighting spirit couldn't put more rounds downrange per minute. Willingness to die didn't make an Arisaka fire semi-automatically. This cognitive dissonance, the collision between taught belief and experienced reality, appears throughout captured Japanese documents from Iwo Jima. Soldiers wrote about feeling helpless during firefights, unable to return effective fire because American volume was too great. Officers reported difficulty maintaining unit cohesion when men realized their weapons placed them at permanent disadvantage. The faith in spiritual superiority that sustained Japanese forces through earlier battles began cracking when confronted with undeniable material reality. Private Yamada, if he survived the initial days, which statistics suggest was unlikely, would have experienced this psychological collapse firsthand. He'd been taught 1 Japanese soldier equaled 10 Americans. But in his pillbox, firing his Arisaka, he couldn't suppress a single Marine squad. They kept coming, kept firing, kept advancing despite everything he could do. Not because he lacked courage or skill, but because his weapon fundamentally limited his combat effectiveness. The American production figures tell part of the story. Springfield Armory and Winchester Repeating Arms manufactured approximately 4,400,000 M1 Garands during World War II. By February 1945, virtually every Marine and Army infantryman carried one. The United States had industrialized infantry firepower, equipping millions of soldiers with semi-automatic rifles, while opponents still carried bolt actions. On Iwo Jima specifically, the 5th Marine Division alone, one of 3 divisions in the assault, brought approximately 13,000 riflemen armed with Garands. Over 73 days of combat, If each rifleman fired an average of just 60 rounds per day, a conservative estimate given combat intensity, that single division would account for over 57 million rounds fired. The actual figure was higher. Marines in sustained combat often fired hundreds of rounds per day, but even conservative mathematics demonstrate the overwhelming volume of fire. Japanese defenders, numbering approximately 21,000 at battle's start, couldn't match that volume. Even if every Japanese soldier fired continuously, their bolt-action rifles simply couldn't achieve comparable rates of fire. The Americans could afford to fire more because they could fire faster, and industrial production ensured ammunition remained abundant throughout the battle. The tactical implications of this firepower disparity shaped every aspect of the battle. Japanese defensive doctrine, as implemented by General Kuribayashi, relied on forcing Americans into killing zones where pre-positioned weapons could inflict maximum casualties. Pillboxes and bunkers were sited to create interlocking fields of fire. When Marines advanced, they'd be caught in crossfire from multiple positions simultaneously. This doctrine worked brilliantly in theory. In practice, it encountered the M1 Garand problem. When Marines entered a killing zone and came under fire from multiple positions, they responded with immediate, overwhelming rifle fire. 8 men with Garands could suppress 2 or 3 Japanese positions simultaneously through sheer volume, buying time for flanking maneuvers or supporting weapons to arrive. German forces in Europe had learned this lesson in 1943 and 44. Multiple Wehrmacht after-action reports noted that American infantry squads delivered firepower comparable to German machine gun teams. Japanese forces on Iwo Jima learned the same lesson independently. The difference was that Germans had some ability to adapt, issuing more machine guns per squad and attempting to develop semi-automatic rifles like the Gewehr 43 and Sturmgewehr 44. Japan's industrial capacity in early 1945 allowed no such adaptation. The home islands were under continuous bombing, raw material shortages were severe, manufacturing capability was collapsing. Even if Japanese designers had perfected a semi-automatic rifle, factories couldn't have produced it at scale. The defenders on Iwo Jima fought with the weapons available, and those weapons were bolt-action Arisakas that couldn't match American firepower. The Marines advancing inland from the beaches understood none of this strategic context. They knew only that their rifles worked. Their training was solid, and the volume of fire they could deliver gave them fighting chance against entrenched defenders. Squad tactics emphasized fire and maneuver. Half the squad would establish a base of fire, Garands putting continuous rounds on target, while the other half advanced. Then roles reversed. The advancing element became the base of fire, and the original base moved forward. This tactic required sustained fire capability. Bolt-action rifles couldn't maintain continuous fire without multiple riflemen coordinating their reload cycles. The M1 Garand made fire and maneuver practical at the squad level without requiring specialized support weapons. Every rifleman was a sustained fire platform. Japanese defenders tried to counter this through positioning and timing. Some learned to hold fire until Marines were extremely close, maximizing the chance that each shot would hit. Others attempted to coordinate fire so that multiple defenders shot simultaneously, creating brief moments of overwhelming firepower that might break an American advance. These tactics achieved occasional success, but couldn't systematically overcome the firepower disparity. The volcanic terrain of Iwo Jima created unique challenges for both sides. The island's surface consisted of loose volcanic ash and rock, making movement difficult, and foxhole construction nearly impossible. Marines couldn't dig in properly. The ash collapsed. Any defensive position required sandbags or other reinforcement materials that had to be brought ashore. Japanese defenders had spent months preparing positions before the battle, carving bunkers into volcanic rock and reinforcing them with concrete. These positions were excellent, but once identified, they became targets for American combined arms. Marines would suppress a position with rifle fire, call in artillery or naval gunfire, then assault with flamethrowers and demolitions. The Garand's role in this process was enabling the initial suppression that kept Japanese defenders from firing effectively while heavier weapons were brought to bear. Captain Samaji Inoue, commanding a company in the Japanese 145th Infantry Regiment, described this process in his diary before his death in early March. His position, located in Iwo Jima's northern sector, came under attack on March 3rd. Inoue wrote that American rifle fire was so heavy that his men couldn't maintain observation of the approaches to their bunker. Every time someone looked through a firing slit, multiple rounds hit immediately. The Americans called artillery, which collapsed part of the bunker's roof. Then flamethrowers arrived, and the position became untenable. Inoue noted that if his men had been able to maintain fire on the Americans during the approach, they might have broken the attack. But the volume of incoming rifle fire made that impossible. Their weapons fire without pause, he wrote. Ours require too much time between shots. We cannot win firefights. This assessment, from a professional officer with years of combat experience, cuts to the heart of the Garand's tactical impact. Japanese defenders weren't poorly trained. They weren't cowards. They weren't incompetent. But they were systematically outgunned at the most fundamental infantry level, and that disadvantage accumulated across thousands of engagements into eventual defeat. The battle for Iwo Jima lasted 73 days, from February 19th through March 26th, 1945. American casualties totaled approximately 27,000, including 6,800 killed. Japanese casualties were nearly total. Of approximately 21,000 defenders, fewer than 216 were captured alive. The rest died fighting or committed suicide. The cost validated General Kuribayashi's strategy. He'd predicted he could inflict 15,000 American casualties. The actual figure exceeded 27,000. For every yard of volcanic rock. But his strategic goal, making American leadership question whether invasion of the home islands was acceptable, ultimately failed. The battle demonstrated that even the most fanatically determined defense, even the most brilliantly designed fortifications, couldn't prevent American victory when America was willing to pay the price. The M1 Garand didn't determine this strategic outcome. American naval superiority, air dominance, artillery, and sheer numerical advantage mattered far more. But at the tactical level, where individual Marines fought individual Japanese defenders, the Garand provided clear advantage that made American victory more likely and somewhat less costly than if both sides had equivalent weapons. The 5.5 million rounds fired from M1 Garands on Iwo Jima represent more than ammunition expenditure. They represent 5.5 million individual trigger pulls by Marines under fire, each shot an attempt to suppress an enemy position, hit a target, or provide covering fire for a squadmate. The semi-automatic operation that made this volume of fire possible was the direct result of design decisions made by John Garand in the 1920s and 30s. Garand, working at Springfield Armory, had devoted nearly 2 decades to perfecting his rifle design. Early prototypes used different operating systems and calibers. He refined the gas system from an early gas trap design to a simpler gas port configuration. He improved the trigger mechanism, enhanced the stock design for ergonomics, and solved countless technical challenges. The rifle adopted in January 1936 was the result of methodical engineering and extensive testing. Garand never served in combat. He never fired his rifle at an enemy soldier, but his work equipped millions of American servicemen with a weapon that gave them tangible advantage in the most dangerous situations humans can face. The Marines on Iwo Jima, who survived firefights because their Garands could outshoot Japanese Arisakas, owed their lives, in small but real measure, to decisions made by a Canadian immigrant engineer working in a Massachusetts armory. The Japanese perspective on the M1 Garand, documented in captured diaries, letters, and after-action reports, reveals a consistent pattern. Initial encounters produced surprise and confusion. Why did American rifles fire so quickly? Were they facing machine gun teams? As understanding developed, surprise gave way to frustration and eventual resignation. Japanese defenders realized they faced systematic disadvantage that courage and determination couldn't overcome. Some Japanese soldiers who captured Garands from American casualties used them when ammunition was available. There are documented cases of Japanese defenders firing captured American weapons, using them until M1 ammunition ran out, then reverting to their Arisakas. The fact that enemy soldiers preferred captured Garands to their issued weapons speaks volumes about the rifle's practical superiority. But captured weapons provided no systematic solution. A few dozen Garands among 21,000 defenders didn't change the overall firepower balance. The vast majority of Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima fought with Arisakas, died with Arisakas, and never had opportunity to use the semi-automatic rifles that were killing them. The broader Japanese military establishment recognized the problem American semi-automatic rifles posed. Intelligence assessments compiled throughout 1944 and 45 identified the M1 Garand as a significant tactical challenge. Recommendations were made to develop Japanese semi-automatic rifles, improve infantry firepower through increased machine gun allocation, and modify tactics to minimize exposure to American rifle fire. None of these recommendations could be implemented effectively by early 1945. Japan's strategic situation was collapsing. The Navy had been destroyed. The Air Force was reduced to kamikaze attacks. Industrial production was failing. Even basic infantry weapons like Arisakas were becoming difficult to produce in adequate quantities. Developing and fielding an entirely new rifle was simply impossible. Japanese soldiers on Iwo Jima represented the end state of this collapse. They were brave, well-trained, and absolutely committed. They occupied excellent defensive positions. They had clear understanding of their mission. But they carried obsolete weapons that placed them at permanent disadvantage against an enemy with superior equipment and unlimited industrial capacity to replace losses. The psychological impact of this situation extended beyond individual frustration in firefights. Japanese military culture had promised soldiers that spirit and determination would overcome material disadvantages. The national narrative held that American wealth and industrial power couldn't compensate for Japanese martial superiority. Soldiers believed, because they'd been taught to believe, that their weapons and training were adequate. Iwo Jima demolished these comfortable myths. No amount of fighting spirit made an Arisaka fire semi-automatically. No intensity of commitment changed the mathematical reality that Marines could deliver more fire faster. Japanese defenders learned through direct, lethal experience that material superiority matters profoundly in modern warfare. This lesson came too late to affect Japanese strategic thinking. By March 1945, when Iwo Jima fell, Japan had perhaps 5 months remaining before unconditional surrender. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August ended the war before planned invasion of the home islands could begin. But if that invasion had occurred, Japanese defenders would have faced the same firepower disparity that killed their comrades on Iwo Jima. American infantry would have carried M1 Garands. Japanese defenders would have carried Arisakas. The tactical mathematics would have remained unchanged, and the casualties would have been astronomical on both sides, though ultimately American material superiority would have prevailed. The M1 Garand's service didn't end with World War II. The rifle fought through the Korean War from 1950 through 53, where it again proved superior to bolt-action rifles carried by North Korean and Chinese forces. It remained in frontline American service until replaced by the M14 in 1957, with full transition taking until 1961. Even then, Garands continued service with reserve and National Guard units into the 1970s. The rifle's influence on subsequent weapon development was profound. Every modern military issues semi-automatic or automatic rifles as standard infantry weapons because the Garand proved that individual firepower multiplication works. The principle established, give every soldier sustained fire. A capability through mechanical automation became foundational to all subsequent rifle design. The AK-47, developed by Mikhail Kalashnikov in the Soviet Union and adopted in 1949, represented the next evolution. It combined the Garand's semi-automatic capability with the Sturmgewehr 44's selective fire feature and intermediate cartridge, creating the template for modern assault rifles. The M14 and later M16 followed similar design philosophy. All these weapons owe conceptual debt to the M1 Garand's demonstration that semi-automatic operation was essential for modern infantry. General George S. Patton's famous assessment, "The greatest battle implement ever devised," reflected this understanding. Patton wasn't claiming the rifle won battles alone. He was acknowledging that for its specific purpose, personal weapon for standard infantry, the M1 represented evolutionary leap that gave American soldiers measurable tactical advantage. The Japanese soldiers who faced Garands on Iwo Jima would have agreed with that assessment, though from painful perspective. They experienced firsthand what German infantry had learned in Europe. Superior position, superior training, and superior determination couldn't overcome systematic firepower disadvantage at the individual level. Private Yamada, if he survived the initial landing, likely died sometime in the following weeks. Casualty rates among Japanese defenders approached 100%. Perhaps he died from artillery, perhaps flamethrowers, perhaps in close combat with Marines who'd finally reached his position. The specific manner of his death is lost to history, but the broader pattern is clear. Japanese defenders on Iwo Jima fought with obsolete weapons against an enemy with superior firepower. They fought bravely, they fought skillfully, they inflicted terrible casualties, but they lost, inevitably and totally, because courage and skill have limits when facing overwhelming material disadvantage. The 5.5 million rounds fired from M1 Garands on Iwo Jima represent this material reality translated into combat action. Each round was an individual attempt to hit a target, suppress a position, or provide covering fire. The semi-automatic operation that enabled this volume of fire was the result of American industrial foresight, engineering excellence, and commitment to providing superior equipment to soldiers. Japan, for all its martial culture and fighting spirit, couldn't match that industrial and technological advantage. The nation's military establishment recognized this eventually, but recognition came too late to affect outcomes. By the time Japanese leadership fully understood, they faced an enemy with superior weapons, superior production capacity, and superior logistical capability. The war was already lost. The M1 Garand stands as testament to what properly designed military equipment can achieve. It didn't win World War II alone. Victory required combined arms, naval, power, air superiority, industrial might, and courage of millions. But at the squad level, where soldiers actually fought and died, the Garand provided clear and measurable advantage. For Marines who carried it on Iwo Jima, the rifle was lifeline. It gave them fighting chance against entrenched defenders in excellent positions. It let them suppress enemy fire while advancing across exposed volcanic sand. It enabled fire and maneuver tactics that gradually reduced Japanese fortifications despite terrible cost. For Japanese defenders who faced it, the Garand was symbol of material reality they couldn't overcome. It represented American industrial capacity to equip millions of soldiers with advanced weapons. It demonstrated that spiritual superiority and fighting determination, however genuine, couldn't compensate for technological disadvantage. The battle for Iwo Jima cost 27,000 American casualties and approximately 21,000 Japanese deaths to secure 8 square miles of volcanic rock. The strategic value of the island, providing emergency landing sites for damaged B-29 bombers returning from Japan, justified the cost in American strategic calculations. But the human cost was staggering, and the M1 Garand's role in reducing that cost, even marginally, through superior individual firepower, mattered profoundly to the Marines who survived. In final analysis, the M1 Garand on Iwo Jima represents intersection of engineering excellence and combat necessity. John Garand's design, refined over 2 decades, gave American infantry a weapon that functioned reliably under the worst possible conditions and provided tactical advantage in the most desperate situations. The Japanese soldiers who faced it learned what German soldiers had learned before them. Modern warfare rewards material superiority. The side with better weapons, properly employed, wins more firefights, suffers fewer casualties, and achieves objectives more efficiently. This isn't romantic, it isn't heroic in the traditional sense, but it's true. The M1 Garand fired 5.5 million rounds on Iwo Jima because it could fire faster than any bolt-action rifle, reload quickly, and function reliably in volcanic sand and ash. Those 5.5 million rounds suppressed Japanese positions, killed Japanese defenders, and enabled marine advances that eventually secured the island. That's the rifle's legacy on Iwo Jima. Not glory, not romance, but effective functionality that gave American infantry real advantage in lethal environment. The Japanese soldiers who feared it most were the ones who understood this reality most clearly. They recognized they faced weapon their Arisakas couldn't match, an enemy whose industrial capacity could equip millions with such weapons. The M1 Garand was indeed the only rifle Japanese feared most on Iwo Jima, not because it was dramatic or terrifying in appearance, but because it worked relentlessly and efficiently. 8 shots, at a time, millions of times over 73 days of hell, that functionality, that reliable semi-automatic fire, made all the difference in a battle where differences measured in seconds and rounds per minute determined who lived and who died. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.